Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Urban Farmer Podcast. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Now let's jump right into it. It's a flashback, The Urban Farmer, as originally recorded 10 years ago with myself and farmer Curtis Stone. Welcome to the Urban Farmer, Week 2. I'm your host, Diego. Urban farming. It works. It can be profitable and it can be productive, and it doesn't have to be high tech. To illustrate this idea, I'm going to be following urban farmer Curtis Stone through a full farm season, week by week. Curtis makes his living farming in the soil in residential neighborhoods all around the city of Kelowna, BC, on just 15,000 square feet.
Most of the production is coming from 4 plots that are all within 2 blocks of each other, and then I have 1 plot that's about 2,000 square feet. That's the furthest one on my network, but there's 5 altogether.
5 plots making up 15,000 square feet. It doesn't sound like much, does it? When people typically think of farms, I think they're thinking in terms of acres, usually big acres, not fractional acres like Curtis farms. But like that old saying goes, it isn't how big it is, it's how you use it that counts. The key to growing on small land is maximizing efficiency and growing high-value crops.
Like, for example, a cabbage is a really low yield per square foot because the one plant is about when the leaves at full maturity are like 3 feet wide, and you'll sell one head for like $3. So it's not an efficient use of space. It's a low yield per square foot. Where something like greens, I can, in a 1 square foot, I can cut lettuce 3 times. I might pull 3 or 4 pounds out of that 1 foot. So that's a high yield per square foot.
What Curtis has come to learn is the key to growing on small land is maximizing efficiency and growing high value crops. You see, when you focus on high value per square foot, you can make good money farming. Actually, really good money farming.
This year, I'm targeting about 85,000 on a third of an acre. So 10 more than I did this year. And I know that's possible because I had a lot of things that I overlooked last year as far as production. I mean, you learn these things every year as a farmer, and so you never stop learning. That's what makes it so exciting.
$85,000 on 15,000 square feet. Is it possible? We'll find out and see how that plays out as this season goes on. These numbers may seem high, but keep in mind this isn't farming commodity crops and selling them where margins are extremely low. This is a very specialized version of farming where you grow crops that have a high value per square foot and you maximize the production per square foot. This means that you're generating a lot of high value product that's perishable. So you're going to need a lot of buyers to absorb all that production. But as anybody who farms knows, it simply isn't grow it and they will come. You have to have a plan. You have to build a customer base. And that's what we're focusing this week on, selling products, primarily selling to restaurants. Restaurants can make up a great customer base because they can take a lot of product off your hands in big bites. But the key is you have to actually get into that market and get those restaurants on as customers. And that's something Curtis has done really well. He's done it over time by building up his social capital and building a rapport with the chefs, providing good service, and of course by consistently providing high quality products. This week, we're going to talk about what goes into maintaining those restaurant customers and how Curtis was able to double the number of restaurant customers that he has this year. Last week was week 1 of the show, and we started off in mid-February, and now 4 weeks have gone by, and it's now March 24th, and the farm season has officially begun.
I call it the setup phase. So from mid-March until mid-May, I call the setup phase. And I'm starting things before that. I mean, I start nursery stuff, in February. But that's not a lot of work. That's just minimal stuff. But between mid-March and mid-May is when I'm getting everything set up on the farm. So I'm pulling out setting up irrigation systems. I'm pulling out polytunnels, getting my greenhouses cleaned out, getting supplies, going and getting truckloads of compost, dropping them off at sites, prepping beds, stale seed bedding, direct seeding in the greenhouses. There's a lot of stuff happening, so it's a pretty busy time on the farm. I actually, in my operation, it's the busiest time of my season. Once I'm rolling, like after mid-May, I'm working 40 hours, 48 hours a week, really, when you include my time at the farmer's market. But then once I get into summer, I'm working sometimes 30 hours a week.
Where would you say you're at now in terms of hours? Because I think if you're in the setup phase of the farm, it's late March. If you're in the setup phase till mid-May, that's 2 months. So how much actually is happening every day?
Well, right now, I'm only working 4 to 6 hours on the farm. I'm still writing a book, so I'm still dedicating, 4 hours a day to that as well. So it's kind of intense, basically. I'm like working, I try to work outside when the weather's perfect, and then when the weather's not perfect, I go inside. And so BC, people say if you don't like the weather here, wait 5 minutes. Like today, raining for 5 minutes, sunny for 10 minutes, raining for 5 minutes. It's crazy. So I'm kind of balancing it back and forth between office work, writing, and farm work. But I'm not doing huge days yet. But once I get into the first week of April, then I'll be doing big days, because then I'll be really starting to get most of the transplants, or a lot of the transplants out, and then I'll be starting marketing. Like I've been selling to restaurants for the last 2 weeks, but just overwintered crops, like nothing major.
So for the sales that you're doing right now, this is stuff that you planted back in November timeframe?
Yeah, exactly. Well, October. So I'm selling, all I'm selling right now is spinach and kale. So I call it overwintering. For spinach, I do a direct seed crop in the first week of October, and then it basically just germinates and sits dormant for the winter, and then it'll grow very incrementally over the course of the winter, but then by February, you're starting to get a small harvest, and then by mid-March, you're getting a lot of a harvest. And then the kale, I start as transplants, or I start in plugs about the third week of July. I transplant it out the first week of August, and then it's mature in the ground by October, and then it basically just sits for the winter. And so I can harvest it all winter, and then I also get a few good picks of it right now for the next few weeks. And then, hopefully after those few weeks, my new kale crop will be ready.
So one of the benefits of these early sales, just start getting the conversations flowing with the chefs in terms of what they're going to be looking for the upcoming season?
Totally. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's a good opportunity because none of them are busy yet, and they're just so stoked to get any fresh product. Like I'm literally the only farmer in town who's selling to restaurants. I'm not saying there aren't other farmers in town that have product. There definitely are. It's just I've got a good relationship with a lot of these restaurant clients that I have, and so I'm the only one supplying them with green stuff right now. That's not including, there's a couple growers that do microgreens. There's some sort of indoor crops. But yeah, I'm one of the only guys that has field crops for these chefs right now. So yeah, it's a great time to get in there and just talk about what's coming up and kind of starting to make some plans for the season.
In terms of that planning, I know from previous conversations with you, this year you have 14 restaurant customers. You had 7 last year, so you've doubled that. How does that affect your farm planning?
It basically means that I have to look at some things and go, okay, what can I really ramp up here? Like, what can I really turn up the dial on? And that really comes down to my quick growing crops. Like, I can't just turn up the dial on things like carrots, kale, patty pan squash, and tomatoes. Though actually I am doubling my tomato production this year, but that's just because I'm including more greenhouses. But the quick growing crops, I can really crank those things up because they have such short dates to maturity, and so I can turn them over a lot quicker. And so essentially, if I grow a little bit less longer season stuff, so if I grow a little less carrots, I can grow a lot more greens because carrots will take 70 days on average to mature, whereas crops like arugula and even lettuce greens in the summer are ready in 21 days. So, if a crop is in a bed for 70 days, well, I could get 3 crops of something like lettuce, arugula, spinach, more of those greens in there in that same bed in the same time frame. So that's kind of what it looks like right now is ramping up the quicker growing things. I've got a lot of new restaurant clients that are interested in my greens. So scaling that up again.
Changing around your crop profile, are you also adding land into production, or are you just modifying what you're actually growing, and then does that affect your farmer's market product? So you can only produce X quantity, and part of X goes to the restaurants, part goes to the farmer's markets. If you pick up more restaurants, does that mean you have less to go to the farmer's markets?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. It's sort of a thing of, I always go back to this. It's just going the path of least resistance. It's just like, one thing that I'm seeing is right now just in my marketplace, and I kind of have to be careful with my words here. Just, I don't want other farmers in the area to think this sounds arrogant or something, but there's a lot of farmers coming online at the farmer's market. The farmer's market is getting saturated. I noticed my sales dipping a little bit there over the last couple of years. And so for me, I've got these chefs that I've developed relationships with over the years. And there's a couple of them now that are actually opening other restaurants. And so I've already got relationships with these guys, is that I just got all this demand from the restaurant end. And so it's like, hey, if they want to take tons of my stuff, well, then that's easy. Like, I don't plan on not going to the farmer's market or anything like that. But, again, it's the path of least resistance. These guys want to buy a lot of my stuff. They're willing to pay a fair price for it. And it's frankly less work. I mean, I don't have to package everything up into individual bags and bunches and all that. And, it's one sales stream. It's just like, boom, in a 2-hour delivery, I'm delivering, in the summertime, like $3,000 of product. So it's a week. So it's just a lot easier. But having said that, I still love the farmer's market. I love the community. Those are the people that I most identify with in my town. And so I don't ever plan on not being at that farmer's market. It's just right now I can move a lot more product outside of the farmer's market. So that's kind of where I'm going.
So do you see the farmer's market more as marketing? If it's essentially more work, you're not doing as much volume, at what point would you say it's not worth doing it? Or is always the intangibles, the social capital side of it, justify at least showing up and selling something there?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I'm so beyond just looking at things strictly as whether they're in one form of capital. Like, I mean, I think this is to me, these are some of the things that for what permaculture means to me, is that it's just looking at things through a diverse lens. It's not looking at one type of yield. It's looking at many types of yields. And so that's exactly it. I mean, the farmer's market for me has so much benefit outside of what I make there as far as cash. And I do well at the farmer's market. If I chose to, I could just make a living from the farmer's market. Might be just like an okay living. But, I go there, I see the people that I want to see. I trade with other farmers. I meet new people, and they're the kind of people that I want to meet. So it's so many other forms of capital there. I mean, I learn a lot of things at the farmer's market too, just by getting to know other growers. I mean, that has been my mentor base as far as farming for years, because of all the other experienced farmers that have been growing for 20 years, conventional and organic farmers. I mean, I've learned a ton from these people. So there's so many other added benefits in there. And frankly, I had one year when I was in a partnership where we took turns doing the farmer's market, and I found myself missing being at the farmer's market. Like it was 2 couples that ran the farm, basically. My ex-girlfriend at the time, or my girlfriend at the time, and then this other couple. And they would do one market and I would do the other market, or we would do the other market. And I found myself missing it when I wasn't there. And I even find that today, like in the winter, I don't go to every market. I don't sell at them. I just go as a customer. But I find myself missing it when I'm not there, because it's become so part of my life.
In terms of restaurant production, You have less this year for the farmers market. So for the restaurants themselves, you're tweaking production there in terms of what you're growing. How close to maxing out the land base you have are you? Like, could restaurants really add more volume? Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, when would you have to say, I have to get more land in order to supply these orders? You just can't fine tune and optimize it anymore.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm maxed out right now. Like, this year will be interesting because of the demand. I'm tempted right now just to find a bunch of more plots. I'm tempted. But because I have so many other projects on the go outside of my farm, I know that wouldn't be a sustainable path for me to go to. But I am very tempted. I literally feel like for the first time since I had a growth spurt 2 years ago where I quadrupled the size of the farm, doubled the staff, or quadrupled the staff even, was in a partnership, and then we maxed out, we saturated the market, it didn't work. And then I scaled back the next year, like considerably, went from 2.5 acres down to a third of an acre. But now I'm feeling, okay, I could move up to a half acre of land and easily move all that product, potentially even more. I mean, one thing that I'm experiencing here too is that, because of my work that I've done outside of my farming, my lecturing, teaching, consulting and writing and stuff like that, more people are hearing about me now. And so I think that's kind of accelerated a little bit the interest in my farm. So now I feel like, yes, I could probably double it or more again and do well. So I think that's what will happen. I don't know if I'll do it all at the beginning. I think I've hired some new staff this year. And so if they work out well and, things go, smooth this year, then by fall we'll start taking on a few more plots and really start, turning up the dial.
So thinking about that, does trying to maintain a smaller number of plots at the absolutely maxed out, optimized level, is that actually more sustainable than taking on more plots that might allow you some wiggle room?
That's a really good question. I find it is, but there are no hard, fast rules with that. I have found that I prefer not to have too much wiggle room. I prefer to have a little bit more demand than I can meet. I kind of find that's a sweet spot. I can't quite define it as a percentage, but I find the closer you get to actually meeting the demand, the higher risk you run of saturating the market. And so I like to stay in a spot where I feel like the customers are just a little bit hungry, like that I'm not feeding them all. And I just mean in a figurative sense, that I'm not completely meeting it, because if I do, all it takes is some kind of externality, like maybe another farmer comes in to meet a bit of that demand, and then boom, it's saturated, and then all of a sudden I'm sitting on product. So I want to have to be a little bit more demand than I can meet. And so that's kind of the sweet spot. So, and as far as that's on the marketing end, and I always kind of like to compare things, marketing and production. On the production end, it's a similar thing in the sense that I would rather have a very small piece of land or pieces of land that I am maximizing their possible potential, meaning that there is very little time between rotations. I'm using every square inch possible. Then having a bit more land where I've got, 5 beds here, 4 beds here that are just kind of sitting dormant for a while. I don't like doing that. Having said that, there are some things that I've learned in previous years that I might employ more next year, like using tarps basically, where I could basically keep, a few beds here or there on draw where I've got them prepared. They're fertilized, then they're basically, they're stale seed bed and all that, but they're just tarped. Just so it's like sort of an overflow. It's like, okay, I need more. Let's pull those out, and then we can really turn up the dial on something. So I'm looking at strategies like that. But in the past, I found if you have more land than you need, it just ends up getting unruly, and then it ends up costing more work than is necessary. And I don't want to do any work on my farm. And this is something that I write about and speak about a lot, is I don't want to do anything on my farm that I'm not getting paid for. So that means pulling weeds is not work that I want to do. And it's work that I consistently strive to not do. I don't want to have to do anything like maintenance of just for the sake of maintenance. I want to plant, harvest, and market. That's where I want to focus all of my energy.
Do you think that by having less land and being forced to maximize the efficiency also makes you keep your foot on the gas and not get lazy on it because you know you don't have that wiggle room?
In a way, yeah. In a way it does, for sure. Because you got to stay up with it. You got to keep, you can't really just, you can't get lazy. I think, in a way, subconsciously, that's kind of built into the system, really. I think that's just sort of something that I like to do personally, and it's something that's made its way into the way I do farm.
Yeah, I like the whole idea that, and it goes back to one thing they often say about businesses is sometimes it's better to have less money in a business than more money when you're starting out, because it forces you to innovate, to be more creative instead of just going out and buying a solution. So
exactly.
If you don't have the land, it forces you to really optimize, to really think about things, to plan accordingly. And those are the intrinsic skills that I think you really need to succeed in this field, where if you can always just keep throwing more land at it, you're not really refining systems in a way that can survive the hardships when they come along.
Yeah. Well, totally. It's almost like, it's a real free market principle in a sense that, necessity is the mother of invention. And, when as you were saying that, I'm imagining, a sort of a government agency where, in a government agency, when things don't work, they just throw more money at it. In the free market, when something doesn't work, it's restructured. And you don't do more money, you pull money out of it, right? So I think in a sense, that's really how I approach my production is really based on these figurative, free market principles, exactly like that necessity is the mother of invention. And, by constraining myself, it does actually allow for more of a creative outcome. Miles Davis said that too, is, with constraint, this isn't verbatim, but the quote, the essential idea is that with constraint, you have freedom. And so, and I'm a musician, that's my background, is that, when you're having an improv session with a group of people, sometimes creating some parameters to limit things really make something beautiful happen a lot quicker, because when you have too many options, you get bogged down on the amount of decisions that you can possibly, or directions you could possibly go. So I think having constraint, in this sense, is very important, actually.
Along the topic of a constraint, you're constrained by land, and you just mentioned a little while ago you're doubling your tomato production. So that's coming at the expense of something else. You have to put up the greenhouses, and then you're not using the space to grow tomatoes where you could have grown something else in the past. How do you decide when to make a switch like that, especially with a long season crop like tomatoes?
Well, the nice thing about the tomato is that it has a lot of opportunity for interplanting. And this is something I've experimented with a lot in the last year, and I'm doing so more this year. And so the great thing about expanding my production of tomatoes is that, well, for one, tomatoes go in my greenhouses, and so there's a lot of advantages there. They also spend about 2 months in pots like they are now in my house. They're not in the ground. Right now the greenhouses are full of early spring crops, and then they will be, as those spring crops are starting to peter out, the tomatoes will be interplanted within those crops. And then, I'll continue to harvest those spring crops as those tomatoes grow. And then the beauty of it is that as these tomatoes, there's a period of about 2.5 months where it's really kind of full on tomato production. We do this technique called hard pruning, where basically we prune every single branch beneath the last ripened set of fruit off the tomato. And so that means at first it's just pruning the suckers, which are the secondary branch between the main stem and a primary branch. that trains the plant up, and we twine them up strings or ropes, is that after every ripened set of fruit, we prune every single branch beneath it. And so what happens is this creates an interesting opportunity. And I discovered this basically out of observation. That observation is that as the sun recedes further back into the sky, so as we get into September, I mean, we're still pumping out tomatoes like crazy, but most of the foliage is like 3 or 4 feet off the ground. And as the sun recedes in the sky, because we pruned every single branch off, now there's all this light on the ground. It's getting on the ground. And so now I can start interplanting the greenhouses with fall greens and even root crops like carrots and such. So, now that I'm doing a lot more no-till stuff, I can get in there with a broad fork, loosen up the subsoil amongst the tomatoes, use my tilther to scuff up the top into the soil, and then start direct seeding right in those greenhouses as my tomato production is still going. So there's some crops, if you can interplant them, you can actually ramp up your production without interfering with anything else. And you can do that without actually using more land. It's just maximizing the land that you're already using.
Thinking of that concept, how many farmers do you think maximize the land that they have? I don't know how many farms you've seen, but knowing these interplanting strategies that you're now experimenting with, do you think most people use a fraction of the land's potential?
No, not at all. I know farms that are 3 or 4 acres and I produce more product than they do. I mean, I probably don't produce more product. Let me rephrase that. I make more money than they do, basically, because I'm growing a different type of crop. But yeah, sure, if you grow in 4 acres of winter squash, that's going to be a lot of pounds that's a lot of weight, but it's not necessarily a lot of production. So no, they don't. They don't at all, because this is the thing, right? Intensive farming came out of Europe. It came out of primarily Italy and France. And those are countries that are confined by space. And so this kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier when I mentioned the Miles Davis quote, is that, it's the necessity is the mother of invention. And so in North America, we've just got land everywhere. And so we take it for granted. And I think that part of that reason has led to a lot of environmental problems that we have today. So I think, no, most farmers don't maximize their land, not even close. Still today, even though, a lot of people know who I am, I tell them I'm farming 1/3 of an acre of land and say that I can, make $80,000 to $100,000 off it. And they think that that's crazy. They can't even fathom what that looks like, because there's so many strategies in there that are just not common to the average farmer.
And what a lot of that production allows, or what a lot of that strategic planning allows you to do, is just stack production and get a lot of production off those small spaces. That's how you can scale up from the 7 restaurants to the 14 like you did this year without really adding more land. Thinking about that, how did you actually acquire the 7 new restaurant customers? How did that come about?
Well, they all approached me. I have a pretty good base of social equity that I've built with chefs over the years. I eat at these restaurants. I know the language. I understand how they're using the product. I've worked with them. I go to food events. I guess people see me as a person who understands the culinary industry, and they want to work with me because of that, because I understand the language. It's like understanding the language of music. If you don't understand the language of music, you can't talk about chord progressions or scales or whatever it is. You might have a hard time working with some musicians. So it's the same thing. I think that's what it is. Also as well, I've worked with the primary group of field to fork restaurants in Kelowna for 5 years now, and a lot of the staff in those kitchens who might have started as just a line cook, they've grown, they've climbed the ranks. Now they're executive sous chefs, and now they're getting jobs at new restaurants. And so now they're saying, hey, let's get Curtis in there and get his product. They're used to the product. They're used to me. They like the way I organize my fresh sheets or things like that. So that's where a lot of it's come from too, is just getting to know the staff. And then they climb the ladders in there, and they work their way up. And a lot of these guys that were literally, in the last 5 years, I've seen people as line cooks to become sous chefs, to become executive sous chefs, to become chef de cuisines, and then to become executive chefs. I've seen them climb the ladders, and so I think I've come along with them for the ride, or we've all kind of worked together and growing.
So when you take on some of these new customers, the restaurants, they're probably familiar with you. Is it more a case of this is what I grow and this is what I have, or do you go the route of what type of product are you looking for and I'll grow it?
It's mostly this is what I have. This is what they know me for. There's always a little bit of I'm interested in trying new things. I don't do that. I used to do that with everybody, and that was a mistake because, you know, most people have the best of intentions, and they'll, you know, talk about this or that and make promises that they can't keep, basically. So there's a risk and a danger in trying to be too flexible or too, you know, for some reason that statement that says be open-minded but not so open-minded that your brain falls out kind of comes to mind, because it's like you don't want to be too open. If you're too open, then people can take advantage of that, and then you'll just end up growing stuff that you can't sell. So there's a bit of both. Essentially, the chefs that I've worked with over the years and that I know are very committed to using my stuff, and I have a great rapport with them. I go for drinks with these guys and women. They're friends of mine. I will do those things with them. But just somebody that comes along and says, "Hey, can you grow this for me?" It's like, no, sorry. Like, you know, we get a relationship going, and perhaps we can talk about it. But generally speaking, the chefs that I work with understand my farm. They understand that it's urban, that it's on a small land base, and that I primarily specialize in quick growing crops, except in the cases of some specialty tomatoes and patty pan squash, and I do carrots and beets as well. But primarily I'm growing quick growing crops, and they like that stuff because that's the kind of stuff they're going to use on their menu for the entire season. And so they like working with a guy like me because I'm consistent in that I can pretty much have the same, you know, at least 10 items that I can have the entire 8-month season.
Do you think if you didn't have the restaurant volume sales that you have, you'd still be growing the same quick growing crops for farmers markets, or do farmers markets lend towards a different set of product?
Every market is different. I mean, every farmer's market, but also every market, I just mean in general, like the general marketplace, is different for your region. So, yes, like just to answer that simply, yes. If I was just doing farmers markets, my farm would be different. It was. Farmers market used to be the predominant sales stream, as well as running a 60-member CSA. And so, you know, I grew 80 different types of vegetables in those cases. And, you know, in those kind of situations, it's generally better to be a one-stop shop because you're trying to leverage, you know, the customer to come to your stand and spend the most amount of money as possible. So being a one-stop shop is just simply a better economic decision. For restaurants, not so much. It's a different game. So yeah, if you're running a CSA in a farmer's market, absolutely. It's a totally different type of thing. It's been very good for me that I have had more demand from the restaurants because it's allowed me to essentially cut out 60 crops that I used to grow that didn't make that much money. You know, I discovered after my 4th year of farming, after growing, 80 crops that year, that there was essentially 10, so not including varieties, but basically just 10 types of crops that made 80% of the profit of the farm. And so I basically that year cut all that other stuff out and made more money and worked way less hours and enjoyed my life a hell of a lot more. So I like working with restaurants in that regard because I can't sell 400 bunches of radishes at a farmer's market. I can't. There's no way. But I can sell 400 bunches a week to restaurants and they'll take them the entire season. Whereas things at a farmer's market have seasons. People have a taste in there. They have a seasonal taste, and they do at restaurants as well. But a lot of people that eat at restaurants, they go there and they want the same thing. And I'm probably one of those people. So that lends itself well to my type of operation.
You ran a CSA then before. You don't do it now. What would it take to get you to do a CSA again?
If I were to do a CSA again, and I probably will at some point, is I would do the broker model. And so this is something that I'm writing about in my book, and we also mentioned in the online course, is this is kind of what I see as the future for urban farmers with CSAs, because a CSA on a small land base is not economical. If you're less than a half an acre, to run a CSA, you're not maximizing the value of your land. You're just not. I mean, and if that's not your outcome, that's totally fine. You know, nobody is saying that. They said there are no rules. There's no hard, fast rules that you have to maximize the production of your land. If that's not somebody's game, then that's fine.
Well, just right there, do you think you could run a CSA where you just sold greens and you took all the volume that went to restaurants, and instead of going to 14 restaurants, it went to 60 homeowners?
No, you can't answer that question, because in every demographic or every bioregion or market, it's different. So in my market, no, people don't want that. We don't have a super educated foodie type person like you might have in Portland or Seattle or LA or San Diego. That doesn't exist here. It's coming, but for the most part, Canada, especially, where I am in BC, it's been a little bit late to the party with the whole foodie movement. And so we just don't have that. But I think what farmers can do, this is something I advocate, and again, it's in the book and in my online course, is that, you can run a CSA as a broker. So an urban farmer can essentially be a farmer that grows high value crops, but then you can broker the crops you don't want to grow from other rural farmers. And there's a synergy there, because they benefit from the transaction just like you do. And you make 25-35% of a markup, which isn't much, but what it allows you to do is run a program where you can have 100 members. And that means you can sell more of your high value crops to those members. So I think that's kind of where it's going. And if I were to run a CSA, I would go back to that. I did it a little bit in a previous year before the partnership fell apart, but we had, 8 different growers we were working with. We had plans to have dairy and meat products and all kinds of stuff, which I would like to do it again, but it requires infrastructure. You need to have a lot more cool space, even some freezer space. So I think the potential's there, because an urban farmer has the advantage of the market access, right? I mean, I'm in the market. I live in the market. I go to these restaurants. I'm in the city. People see me, and my farm is accessible because it's in the city. I mean, I'm close to major apartment complexes. So I'm convenient for a lot of people. And so driving out into the country to get a CSA, might not be as convenient. And also it's hard for a lot of CSA farmers to deliver door to door to meet a widespread demand that an urban farmer could meet.
Would you do something like that just as more of a diversifier of risk by taking on another potential customer base so you're less exposed to the restaurant trade? Because I see it as the restaurant trade works. It's easy relative to all that aggregation with just a little markup on the products that you don't grow. So what's the gain of doing something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's pretty much a diversification scheme. But having said that, you can diversify in the restaurant market by just having more restaurants and having different types of restaurants, right? I mean, this is the key. Like, the basic idea is, as an urban farmer, we grow less crops than other organic farmers. We have to. So the key is to diversify your market streams. If you only, like, I've got a friend in Vancouver who's got a absolutely stellar microgreens operation called Vancouver Food Peddlers, and they grow, 3 or 4 different types of crops, but they have, 25 or 35 customers, juice bars, restaurants, salad bars, all kinds of different types of restaurants. And that's the key there too, is that, once you pull the lens back a little bit, you can see that there is a diversification in those market streams. So, I mean, I think at the same time, there's also a joy in running a CSA. Like, it is a cool thing to do, in the sense, like, just like the farmers market, there's a pretty immense amount of capital and equity outside of the financial means. In that is that you build this community of people that are connected to your farm, and there's a lot of value in that. It just is a lot of enjoyment and, quality of life as well. And so I try to often think about things in those terms than just to say, is this just about the money? Because it's often not.
When you deal with just the restaurants themselves, it's easy to say yes to a new customer, especially when they're a big buyer of product. At what point would you say no to a restaurant? Like, do you have the ability to read chefs now and say, I don't want to deal with this person?
Oh yeah, all the time, man. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, that's something I struggled with. That's a great question. That's something I struggled with for many years, actually. I said yes to everything and everyone, and it nearly killed me because you're just constantly hustling to keep up to like, keep your promises basically. And it gets difficult. Now I'm very choosy. And in fact, I'm in I've worked hard. I've worked, 100 hours a week pretty much for the last 5 years. And I don't just mean on my farm. I've worked on urban farming, lecturing, all the other things that I do. I've worked very hard to get to where I am. And I'm seeing the benefits of that in the sense that I don't need to go and look for new customers. They come to me because they like what my farm is about. They like what I'm about. And ultimately they like the product and they like the price. But yes, I say no all the time. It's actually very liberating when you can say no. When you get to a point in your life where you can say, "Hey, I don't actually need this." And so, yes, I do. I say no. I say no for various reasons. A lot of the time it's because when I get approached by a new customer, I do research on them. I find out, because chefs move around. Chefs are free agents for the most part. Find out where they worked, find some history on them, find history on the restaurateurs, the owners. What do they like? Do they pay their bills? Do they owe a bunch of money around town? What do they like to deal with? And, talk to other farmers that might have dealt with them, talk to wholesalers. I do quite a bit of research when a new customer approaches me, and I say no all the time. And I say no for those reasons, because I find out they don't pay their bills, or a prima donna, to be honest. To some people in the food industry that have, because of the foodie culture has gotten so blown up in the last little while, the Food Network and all those television shows where, chefs are celebrities. And don't get me wrong, everybody I work with for a reason, because I think they're stellar people. But I have literally stopped working with some chefs because they're prima donnas. And for me, life is too short to deal with bullshit. I don't want to go into a restaurant and be yelled at by some chef and see this complete hierarchy of power, these power structures that are just militaristic. I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to put up with that stuff. And so I have a little bit in the past, and I just said, you know what? This isn't worth it to me, man. Life is too short. You might be buying $300 of product from me a week, but if I got to come in here and listen to you scream at me about something that is not my problem, then forget it, right? So it's kind of a nice place to be when you can say no and not have to worry about, oh no, I can't afford to lose this customer. It's like, I'm living in a land of abundance, man. I mean, it's a mindset thing, but the law of abundance attracts abundance. And so I'm happy to say no sometimes, because it's like every time I say no, every time a negative opportunity or a negative person walks out of my life, 5 more new positive ones walk in. So sometimes it's a great thing to say no.
And I think that's the evolution of a farmer, evolution of any business owner, is just getting to that point. At the beginning, you feel like any sale is better than no sale. So once you start to do this and evolve, you realize the power of no, work with people that you want to work with, take the sales you want to take, and turn away the stuff that you don't want. And I think that ultimately adds to your demand in the long run anyway.
Absolutely. It does. I mean, my buddy Javin Bernakovich says this great thing. He's like, I don't want to work with anybody that I can't hug. And I literally feel the same way. I want to be working with people that, are in that abundance mindset and that are enjoying life and are easy to work with and are having fun and are passionate about what they do. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Great. So you're expanding the reach this year, taking product to more restaurants. Any other things that you're looking forward to this season?
I've bought a bunch of new tools and been doing a lot of experimenting there. And so far it's been really good. So I've really moved towards doing a no-till approach. So I still use a tiller, and again, it's all about the right tool for the right job. I still use my tiller when I'm preparing land, because it's simply the best way to get that job done. But once land is prepared and beds are formed, I'm now I'm still figuring out exactly the best way to do it. I've had a local steel fabricator build me a really kick-ass broad fork. So I've been using that. And so I'm doing this no-till stuff now where basically I broad fork the subsoil to aerate it. And then I go in with this, put in my compost, my organic fertilizer. I go in with this tool called a tilter that basically just tills the top inch of the soil so it doesn't, invert the soil structure. And that creates a nice, perfect seed bed. I use this tool called a seed bed roller. And it's been really cool. Cause I've got no weeds. It's amazing. We'll see how it goes in the summer, but so far, for only a little bit of extra work, I'm getting beds where I'm getting better germination because of the way the soil has already kind of been packed down a little bit over the winter, which is a good thing to a certain degree. And, I'm looking to have zero weeds. And so for me, I don't do much weeding anyways. I probably only pull weeds for about 4 to 8 hours an entire season. But it's about making the product better. If I can have no weeds in my greens, that means less time sorting them, a better product for the customer at the same price. So the value is being extended across the board. And so that's one thing that I'm really excited about doing this year and implementing it, and kind of, a lot of people criticize rototilling, and it's something that I've done a lot of over the past. And it's cool to kind of adapt to what, other farmers are doing and see how I can implement them and try new techniques.
It's probably a good segue in the topic to talk about next week. So we'll swing back next week and talk about this whole no-till strategy and how you're approaching that for the farm this year. All right, man. See you next week. Thanks for watching this episode of The Urban Farmer. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.